1960s and early 70s hold some of the most famous events in our country's history. Student organizations carried out protests and demonstrations that would be remembered for decades to come. The Monterey Pop Festival in Woodstock exemplified the counterculture movement. It also marks the death of two great leaders and the first president to resign from office. The war in Vietnam created an era of resistance towards the American government, as well as greatly dividing the nation.
There's a link. There's a link of the music to that period of time. Garfunkel, Simon and Garfunkel, the sound of silence. When I hear it, it sort of brings a little bit of tears to me. I sort of don't like to listen to the whole thing. I move on. Woodstock was different. Woodstock was about getting high. Okay? Woodstock was about, it wasn't about the war. It was about getting high. The war was about Bob Dylan, Simon and Garfunkel. Those sounds affected me, and I'm sure it affected some of the other individuals who are contemporary of mine. Woodstock was about having a good time, smoking a doobie and listening to the music. The war had a different sound.
Woodstock was a gathering of people in New York, 3 days of peace and music. The 3-day concert featured some of the greatest acts in rock history, from The Who to Jimi Hendrix and others like Janis Joplin and Van Morrison. Some say that the festival was about the music and the gathering of people, while others say it was just about smoking doobies and getting high. Still, it can't be denied that the images and video from Woodstock helped define the generation of people who experimented with drugs and other substances, and that protested the war. The election of 1968 was a major event. It was a culmination of events: the war, the anti-war movement, and the civil rights movement. The people were looking for a candidate that would meet the requirements needed to fix all these issues and do it swiftly. A hopeful was Robert Kennedy. He stood like an icon reminiscent of his brother, and just like his brother, he was taken from the world too early in Los Angeles. This now left the door wide open for Richard Nixon to win with a silent majority, the people who were blue-collar, that just wanted things to be over with, that didn't do any protesting. And this led him to a win, becoming our 37th president.
On June 17, 1972, 5 men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. Authorities arrested the men and found that they had placed wiretaps on the telephones of DNC executives. After the release of tapes containing Nixon's discussion of Watergate and the resignation of several of his aides, Nixon resigned from the presidency of the United States. After Gerald Ford became president, he pardoned Nixon of any crimes he may have committed as president.
In those days, there was one of the most active groups were the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, which I was a member of. Eventually it broke into two factions: the more radical group, the Weathermen, and the more docile group, the traditional SDS movement. So there'd be discussions about what to do. How do we get involved? How do we send our message to the administration? How do we send the message to the citizens of Michigan and the country that MSU was supporting an anti-war movement?
There were 2 historic protests where members were hurt and even killed. The Kent State Massacre and the Jackson State shootings resulted in a total of 21 injured and 6 killed. This brutality was all too common at protests and demonstrations. Other historic demonstrations included those in California and Maine, where students protested recruitment from Dow Chemical, the producer of Napalm B, a petroleum-based gel used in the war. It is known for its horrible burns in that it causes to humans.
On April 29, 1975, North Vietnamese forces began a heavy artillery bombardment on Saigon. By the next day, troops had occupied the city and raised their flag at the South Vietnamese presidential palace. Prior to the capture of the city, all American military had been evacuated, along with tens of thousands of South Vietnamese civilians during Operation Frequent Wind. The war had ended, and Saigon was now Ho Chi Minh City.